Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everybody. Hello. Okay, we're live right now. Wow. Yesterday is really, it is April the 10th, the 2 in America. Okay, this afternoon is really a big day, Labor Day, okay? Labor Day for America. The Trump administration just released the new tariffs on every country. Oh my goodness. Okay, maybe we can find the solution in this book. Okay, let's continue. An instrument of plut- plutocracy, 富豪. An instrument of plutocracy. An instrument of plutocracy. Okay. Integrity. Act with integrity, a shaking notion at best. OK，上一章讲，其实自由市场本身就可以调节，对不对？但是政府非要把他的咸猪手放进来，这样的话，控制政府的这些人就会从中渔利。In any event, there's no denying the fact that the Bank of the United States did provide some braking force to the runaway tendencies of many of the nation's private banks. But so it could have been worse. The inflation that it caused by its own activities could have been enlarged even further by the activities of the other banks as well, but that it could have been worse does not make it good. As it was, the ban was a means by which the American people lost 42% of the value of all the money they earned or possessed during just those 5 years. We must not forget either that this confiscation of property was selective. It did not work against the wealthy classes, which were able to ride the wave of inflation aboard the raft of tangible property which they owned. And it especially did not work against those elite few, the political and monetary scientists who were making huge profits from the enterprise. The bank had done precisely what Hamilton had advocated: unite the interests and credits of rich individuals with those of the state. 团结了富人。The development of this plutocracy was well described by Governor Morris, the former delegate from New York who had helped to draft the Constitution into its final form. He had been an assist to Robert Morris, not related, and was a champion of the concept of natural aristocracy. 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 贵族。可是on neutral aristocracy. So he knew his subjects well when he warned, the rich will strive to establish their domination and enslave the rest. They always did. They always will. They will have the same efforts here as elsewhere if we do not, by such a government, keep them within their proper spheres. We should remember that the people never act from reason alone. The rich will take advantage of their passions and make these instruments of oppressing them. The result of the contest will be violent aristocracy, or a more violent despotism. 富豪阶层很乐意去建立一个统治，加固他们的统治，然后奴役其他的阶层。They always did，他们总是这样做。They always will，他们一直乐意这样做。They will have the same effort here as elsewhere，这里那里都一样。If we do not, by such a government, keep them within their proper spheres，富人将努力建立他们的统治并奴役其他人，过去一直如此，将来也会如此。我们不通过这样的政府限制他们的时代范围，他们在这儿都会产生同样效果。我们应该记住，人们从来不仅凭理性行事，富人会利用他们的情感，将这些作为他们压迫他们的工具。这场斗争的结果是一个暴力的贵族制或一个更加暴力的专制统治。The rich will strive 力争 strive to do something strive to establish their domining okay the meaning the meaning dominate the meaning and enslave the rest. They also did, they also will. 过去、将来都是这样。They will have the same effort here as elsewhere if we do not, by such government, keep them within their proper spheres. Spheres 球体环形阶层界限范围。We should remember that people never act from reason alone. The rich will take advantage of their passions and make these instruments for oppressing them. Oppressing them. 超过民意呗。The results of the contest will be a violent aristocracy or a more violent despotism. Despotism 专制政府，贵族。aristocracy The tide of political prayer against the bank was steadily rising during these years. It is tempting for critics of the central bank mechanism to attribute that to the awakening common sense of the American public. Unfortunately, the picture is not that pleasant. It is true that the Jeffersonian Republicans were eloquently holding forth against the creature's progenitor, 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 and their influence was substantial. But there was another group that joined with them, which had almost exactly opposite ideas and goals. The Jeffersonians opposed the bank because they believed it was unconstitutional and because they wanted a monetary system based only upon gold and silver. The other group was made up of the Whitecatters, the land speculators, and the empire building industrialists. They opposite the bank because they wanted a monetary system with no restraints at all, not even those associated with fractional reserve. They wanted every local bank to be free to create as much paper money as the public would swallow, because they would then use that money all for their own projects and profit. Indeed, politics does produce strange bedfellows. As the time approached for renewal, the bank's charter, the battle lines inches toward each other. They were equal force. They were of equal force. The halls of Congress echoed with the gunning roar of angry debate. The vote was deadlocked. Another attack and counter-attack. Again a deadlock. Into the night of the forces clashed. 争吵，争论，这真的是白刀子进去，红刀子出来。你发展随着特许权续约时间的临近，双方的战线逐渐逼近，他们的力量相当。国会的走廊回荡着激动的证人的炮声，投票陷入僵局 ，deadlock，一次又一次的攻击和反击，再次陷入僵局，双方失利彻夜冲突。As time approached for renewal, renewal, of the bank's charter, the battle line inched toward each other. They were of equal force. The halls of Congress echoed with the gunner roar of angry debate. 1832年的国会争论 The vote was deadlocked. Another attack and counterattack. Again a deadlock. Into the night of the force clashed. clashed. 第二合众国银行续期 When the smoke of battle lifted, the bill for charter renewal had been defeated by mere vote in the House and one vote cast by Vice President George Clinton to break the tie in the Senate, and so on January 24, 1811, the Bank of the United States closed its door. Oh, the Bank of the United States closed its door. The battle may have been decided, but the war was far from over. The losers, bitter with defeat, merely regrouped their forces and began to prepare for the next encounter. Unfortunately, the events that followed were ideally suited for their plans. With the moderating effort of the bank now removed from the scene, the nation's banking system passed wholly into the hands of the state-chartered corporations, many of which were imbued with the white cat mentality. Their numbers grew rapidly, and so did the money supply which they created. Inflation followed in their footsteps. Public dissatisfaction began to rise. 啊，天呐，这个民主党，共和党的前身呐、战斗已经结束，但战争远未结束。失败者因失败而痛苦，他们只是重组了他们的力量，并为下一次遭遇做准备。不幸的是，随后的事件非常适合他们的计划。随着银行的调节作用从舞台上消失，国家的银行系统完全落入了州特许公司的手中，其中许多公司都怀有野猫心态，它们的数量迅速增长，它们创造的货币供应量也迅速增长，通货膨胀紧随其后，公众的不满情绪开始上升。The battle may have been decided, but the war was far from over. The losers, bitter with defeat, merely regrouped their forces and began to prepare for the next encounter. Unfortunately, the events that followed were ideally suited for their plans. With the moderating efforts of the bank now removed from the scene, the nation's bank system passed wholly into the hands of the state-chartered corporations, many of which were imbued with the one cat mentality. Their number grew rapidly, and so did the money supply which they created. Inflation followed in their footsteps. Public dissatisfaction began to rise. 哎呦，我天呐！If the free market had been allowed to operate, it is likely that competition soon would have wicked out the wildcat factors and restored balance to the system, but it was never given a chance. The War of 1812 saw to that. The War of1812年的战争。United States and Great Britain from 美国英国之战，原因贸易限制，英国强征美国人头，美国扩张主义，推动了第二合众国银行的建立。1812年战争暴露中央银行热点，导致1810年新银行成立。此战争可能被视为银行派利用的契机。讨论战争如何为中央银行注入反衬宪法出动。The War of 1812 was one of the most senseless wars in history. The primary cause was, we were told, was the British impressment into their navy of American sailors on the high seas to assist in the war against Napoleonic France. But the French had done exactly the same thing to assist in the war against England, yet the acts were ignored. Furthermore, the British had already rescinded取消 their policy regarding American seamen before the war was underway, which means that the cause of the war had been removed and peace could have been restored in honor if Congress had so wanted. One must conclude that the pro-banking interests in the United States actually wanted the conflict because of the profits that could be realized from it. As evidence of this is the fact that the New England states, which were home to the seamen who had been impressed into service, were firmly against the war, while the western and inland southern states, which were home to the myriad无数的myriad 数不清的无数的 a welcome back howled loudly for a clash of arms. In any event, the war was unpopular with the average citizen, and it was out of the question for Congress to obtain funding for armaments through an increase in taxes. So the government needed the state banks to create that money outside the tax structure and came to their rescue to protect them from the surplus of the free market. It was a classic case of the unholy alliance and cabal that always develops between political and monetary science. Professor Respord gives the details. The US government encouraged the U.S. government encouraged an enormous expansion in the number of banks and in banknotes and deposits to purchase the growing war debt. These new and reckless inflationary banks in the Middle Atlantic, Southern and Western states printed enormous quantities of new notes to purchase government bonds. The federal government had then used these notes to purchase arms and manufacture goods in New England. By August 1814, it became clear that the banks of the nation, apart from New England, could not pay in specie, that they were insolvent rather than allow the banks of the nation to fail the government, state and federal, decided in August 1814 to allow the banks to continue in business while refusing to redeem their obligations. 义务 obligations 责任义务责任还债债务 obligations in specie. In other words, the banks were allowed to refuse to pay their solemn contractual obligations. Contractual. This general suspension was not only highly inflationary at the time, it set a precedent for all financial crises from then on. Precedent 先例 President Whether the U.S. had a central bank or not, the banks were assured that if they inflated together and then go into trouble, government would bail them out. The state banks had created enough instant money for the federal government to raise the debt from 45 million to 127 million. The staggering sum for the fledgling nation. The staggering sum for the fledgling nation. Tripling the money supply with no appreciated increase in goods means the value of the dollar shrank to about one-third its former purchasing power. By 1814, when the depositors began to awake to the scam and demanded their gold instead of paper, the banks closed their doors and had to hire extra guards to protect officials and employees from the angry crowds. Once again, the monetary and political scientists had succeeded in reaching the American public of approximately 66 of all the money they held during that period, and that was one top of the 42 fleecing they got a few years earlier by the Bank of the United States. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Juggling tricks and banking dreams. 丛林法则和银行之梦 Running against the storm of paper money all the time was Tom Jefferson, by now past president of the United States, trying to bring the nation to its senses. He never ceased speaking out against the evil of dishonest money and debt. Although all the nations of Europe had tried and trodden every path of force and fully in a fruitless quest of the same object, yet we still expect to find in juggling tricks and banking dreams that money can be made out of nothing and in sufficient quantity to meet the expense of heavy work. The toleration of banks' paper discount costs the United States one half of their war taxes, or, in other words, doubles the expense of every war. The crisis, then, of the abuse of banking is arrived. The banks have pronounced their own sentence of death. Between 2 and 300 millions of dollars of their promissory notes are in the hands of the people for solid reproduce and property sold, and they formally declare that they will not pay them. Paper was received on belief that it was cash, and such things are now to take place as well as will open the eyes of credulity and insanity itself to the dangers of paper medium abandoned to the discretion of avarice and swindlers. It is wise rule never to borrow a dollar without laying a tax at the same instant for paying the interest annually and the principal with a given term. We shall consider ourselves unauthorized to settle posterity with our debts and morally bound to pay them ourselves. The earth belongs to the living, not the dead. We may consider each generation as a distinct nation with a right to bind themselves, but not to succeeding generations. The modern theory of the perpetuation of debt has drenched the earth with blood and crushed its inhabitants under burdens ever accumulate, and still Congress did not listen. 哇，他的这个总结很好哎，看一下啊，我翻译一下，我们翻译一下，这个很棒，这个很棒啊。这个全球的统治者最希望的就是什么呢？就是战争混乱战争，然后浑水摸鱼，恐吓这些羊群，这就是他们做的事情。擅长如此，一贯如此，混淆视听。哎，所以想做和代际公平的回忆一下的。我需要Although all the nations of Europe had tried and trodden every path of force and folly in a fruitless quest of the same object, yet we still expect to find in juggling tricks and banking dreams that money can be made out of nothing and in sufficient quantity to meet the expense of heavy work. 尽管人员尝试进行各种道路 of force and folly in the fruitless quest of the same object, yet we still expect to find in juggling trees and banking dreams. Juggling that money can be made out of nothing and in sufficient quantity to meet the expense of heavy war. 徒劳的追求同一目标，我们却仍希望通过欺骗和银行幻想，发现可以凭空制造金钱，并且数量足以应对沉重战争的开支。The toleration of paper discount costs the United States one half of their war taxes, or in other words, doubles the expense of every war. 容忍发行纸币 Toleration of banks of paper discount costs the United States. 那句话说，使每次战争开支翻倍。The criticism then of the abuse of banking is arrived. The bank have pronounced their own sentence to death. Between 2 and 300 millions of dollars of the promissory notes, and in the hands of the people, for so produce and property sold, and they formally declare that they will not pay them. 银行滥用的危机到来，银行以为自己他们发行的2、3亿的期票代理人永远购买实在的，而他们正上面将不兑换这些票据。Paper was received on belief of that it was cash, and such things are now to take place as we open the eyes of credulity of and insanity itself to the dangerous paper medium, abandon the discretion of Avaro and the Swedes, and now take place, as will open the eyes of credulity, and of insanity itself to the dangers of a paper medium, abandoned to the discretion自行决定 of avarice and of swindlers. 纸币被接受基于人为现象，而即将发生的情景将使轻信和疯狂本身睁开双眼，看到纸币翻译成中文并注明翻译细节。我是一个语言模型，在这上面帮不上忙。It was received on the belief that it was cash, and such things are now to take place as will open the eyes of creditors and of incentive itself to the dangers of paper media, abandoned to the discretion of various and of sweaters. Discretion, various and sweaters. 逐句翻译背，逐句翻译一下。The crisis then of the abuse of banking is arrived. The banks have pronounced their own sentence of death. Between $200 and $300 million of their processed notes are in the hands of the people for the products and profits sold, and they formally declare that they will not pay them. Paper was received on behalf that it was cash, and such things are now to take place as will open the eyes of critics of the Senate itself to the dangers of paper medium, abandoned to the discretion of others, and paper was released on a behalf that it was created. Such things are not take place as will 放任给 abandoned to the discretion of us and 而现在即将发生的场景将使轻信和疯狂的人们都睁开。The place as we open the eyes of credulity and of instinct itself to the dangers of paper media, but then to the discretion of avarice, and of swindlers. Avarice of swindlers. 诈骗犯 swindlers. Avarice 贪婪和诈骗。It is a wise rule never to borrow a dollar without paying tax at the same instant, or paying the interest annually and the principal with a given term. 一条明日的规则 It is a rule never to borrow a dollar without laying a tax at the same instant or paying there. 永远不要借美元，而不立刻征收一项税收以支付每年的利息，并在一个给定的期限内偿还本金。反对债务累积 Laying a tax 绝不借1美元而不立即征收一笔税款，以支付每年利息，并在规定偿还本金。We shall consider ourselves honored to settle posterity with our debts. 我们将无权将我们的债务倾向给的。Settle posterity with our debts. We shall consider ourselves honored to settle posterity. Settle posterity. Posterity 后代后裔。Settle 沉重负担。With our debts and morally bound to pay them ourselves. Pay them ourselves. 我们将认为自己无权，并在道德上有义务自己。The earth belongs to the living, not the dead. We may consider each generation as a distinct nation, with the right to bind themselves but not to succeeding generation. 我们 consider each generation as a distinct nation, with the right to bind themselves but not to succeeding generation, but not the succeeding generation. 集体 bind themselves, not the succeeding, not the succeeding. Not the succeeding, bind themselves, not the succeeding generation. The modern theory of perpetuation of death has drenched the earth with blood. 现在语序这里已经是地球 perpetuation the pressure of something, the pressure of death drenched the earth with drenched, get drenched, and crushed its inhabits under burdens every accumulating. Inhabits crushed its inhabitant, crushed every burdens every accumulates. 天哪！Still Congress did not listen. 哇，说的很对呀，但是人类的贪婪，人类不是理性的，人类是有情感的，而这些人呢，正是用了这些情感来获取他们的利益，所以大众就是被操纵的。Okay, summary. America had its first central bank even before the Constitution was drafted. It was called the Bank of North America and was chartered by Constitution in 1781. Modeled after the Bank of England, it was authorized to issue more paper promissory notes than it held in deposits. In the beginning, these notes were widely calculated and served as a national currency. Although the bank was essentially a private institution, it was designed for the purpose of creating money to lend to the federal government, which it did from the start. The Bank of North America was riddled with fraud, and it quickly fell into political disfavor. Its inflated banknotes eventually were rejected by ordinary citizens and ceased to calculate outside of the bank's home city of Philadelphia. Its chapter was allowed to expire, and in 1783 it was converted into a purely commercial bank chartered by the state of Pennsylvania. The advocates of fiat money did not give up. Advocates 支持 advocates 拥护者 The advocates 2. In 1791, the first bank of the United States, America's second central bank, was created by the Congress. A new bank was a replica of the first, including fraud. Private investors in the bank were among the nation's most wealthy and influential citizens, including some congressmen and senators. But the largest investment and the most powerful influence in the new bank came from the Rothschilds in Europe. 都是 Rothschild 的家族。The bank set about immediately to serve its function of creating money for the government. This led to a massive inflation to the money supply and rising prices in the first 5 years. 42 of everything people had saved in the form of money was confiscated through the hidden tax called inflation. This was the same phenomenon that had plunged the colonies less than 2 decades earlier, but instead of being caused by printing press money, it was now fueled by fractional reserve bank notes created by a central bank. As the time renewal of banks charter approached, two groups were opposite. Intentions became strained political allies against it. The Jeffersonians, who wanted sound money, and the frontier banks called wildcatters, who wanted unlimited license to steal. On January 24, 1811, the charter was defeated by 1 vote in the Senate and 1 in the House. The central bank was gone, but the wildcatters were everywhere. The War of 1812 was not popular among the American public, and the founding would have been impossible through taxes alone. The government chose to fund the war by encouraging world banks to purchase its war debt bonds and convert them into banknotes, which the government then used to purchase war materials. Within 2 years, the nation's money supply had tripled, and so had prices. Once again, the monetary and political scientists had succeeded in fleecing the American public of approximately 66 of all the money they had during that period, and that was on top of 42 fleecing they got a few years earlier by the Bank of the United States. Oh my goodness. A den of vipers, a den of war vipers. Chapter 17, The Story of Second United States. 毒蛇之潮。You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out. 认为银行是富士塔威胁民主，反对中央集权金融。The nation's third central bank, the election of Andrew Jackson, and an anti-bank platform. The battle between President Jackson and the head of the bank, Nicholas Biddle, the deliberate creation of the pressing of to frighten the public into keeping the bank. Jackson's ultimate victory. 安德之反对银行纲领当选。杰克逊总统和银行行长尼古拉斯·彼得尔之间的斗争，故意制造经济萧条，以恐吓公众保留银行，杰克逊最终胜利。哇，居然胜利了！啊啊！天哪，居然胜利了！啊，Den of Vipers，Den Den of Vipers，毒蛇之巢，Den of Vipers。OK，哇，we learned a lot，we learned a lot。哎呀，当我读完第16章的时候，Chapter 17，下一章，当我读完上一章的时候，我发现呢，这些地痞流氓啊，就是利用制造恐慌、制造破坏、制造种种，然后恐吓民众，让民众恐慌，然后以达到他们的目的，对吧？从中获益，掠夺民众的财产。我觉得这是一条怎么说呢？如果单纯这个动物性的角度，不考虑道德也好，不考虑正确也好，不考虑个人情感来讲，单从动物的这个掠夺性来讲，我觉得这是一个高招，这是一个高招，确实是一个高招。乱中取胜，就是打乱战，乱中取胜，利用各种漏洞，因为你想把一件事情做好，你要方方面面把这些事情，对吧？至少1、2、3、4、5、6、7条，把这些各个条都要做对做好。但凡有一条漏洞，那么这些坏分子就会把这个漏洞就会钻空子，所以钻空子的这些人，他们始终是我感觉从战略上来讲，他们是占有上风的，因为他不去主动做好事，他就是搞破坏嘛，搞破坏总比对吧？你完完整整做好一个东西，和你去搞破坏一个东西，当然搞破坏来得快，利用你的漏洞搞破坏。但是这里，当我完完全全对这个事情觉得搞破坏挺爽的这件事情，当我对正义正确是吧失去信心的时候，因为你想做对一件事情太难了，搞破坏的随时都在嘛。当我对这失去信心的时候，哎，第17章啊，Den of Vipers，居然就是最终 Ultimate Victory，他居然取胜了，怎么取胜的呢？哎，我真的是不知道，我真的是不知道他是怎么取胜的。难道公众真的是觉醒了？被这些骗子是不是骗子惨了，然后就不信了？嗯，不知道。I don't know. So tomorrow we'll continue reading the chapter 17. I think the new chapter will give me the answer. Okay. Please give me the answer. Okay, I think that's all for today. That's all for today. Thank you. Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow. Bye bye. Bye bye.